Hi there. In today's video, we are going to see how to use AI to generate Grafana dashboard. We are going to do this using Clio, the DevOps assistant. So Clio is a binary that you can install on your system, and it comes pre-baked with a lot of AI assistants. One of the requirements to running Clio is having an OpenAI API key. But if you don't have, you can simply just run Clio, use your GitHub account, and get started. So the first step that I'm going to go and do here is ask Clio to create a GKE cluster for me. And when I ask that, it takes few settings based on its own understanding. And in this case, it throws me an error because my account doesn't have that limit. So now I'm suggesting it that, hey, adjust the cluster configuration to use a lower configuration for things like memory, storage, and CPU. So based on this prompt, it tries to generate a cluster again, this time with lesser resource requirement. And let us switch to the GCP console and see what's happening here. So if you see here, the cluster Clio Grafana is in progress. So now that our cluster is ready, let us go ahead and install a simple Nginx application. And Clio is intelligent because it has an AI agent built in for various activities that we saw. And now I'm going to ask it to deploy a simple Nginx application on this cluster and configure the service so that I can access the application through an external URL. Now, because it has access to the Kubernetes agent, it is able to understand this query and create a deployment for Nginx. So it has successfully created the deployment, and it is asking whether I want to expose this deployment to be able to access it externally. So I give yes, and it does whatever is required to make the service accessible. And once that is done, it is going to give me the external URL of the service that it has created. So if you see, the service external IP address is still pending, so it will ask me to wait. And after a few seconds, I can ask back, hey, go ahead and check the status of the external IP. And if you have the IP address, give that to me. So let us try that. And here we have the external IP address. And I'm going to open it in a browser. And here it is. So we have successfully installed Nginx on our GKE cluster. So let us now go ahead and configure the Nginx exporter plugin, which basically allows you to access and view the metrics of the Nginx installation that we have done. So when I give this command to Clio, it knows what it's required and it will create a config map to configure the existing Nginx deployment that we have, and then make the necessary changes for it to enable the metrics that would be available at this endpoint. So if you see here, it is changing the deployment configuration, creating and editing a few files. And once that is done, it is going to redeploy the Nginx deployment. And once this is successfully done, we have the Nginx exporter already in place. So if you look closely, it has suggested to use Prometheus so that we can configure it to scrape the metrics from the Nginx exporter. So let us ask Clio to configure Prometheus on the cluster and then configure Nginx exporter as the scrape target. So it is intelligent enough to know how to install Prometheus, and it is using the Helm chart, which is present for that. So it is going to configure the Helm repos, it is going to fetch an update, and then it is going to install Prometheus on the cluster. So now if you see, it has successfully installed Prometheus, and now it is going to configure the Prometheus config.yaml file and then configure the Nginx exporter's IP address as a scrape target. So if you see, it has mentioned what is required. So that's where it says, let's configure Nginx exporter, and then it gives the configuration that is required. And then it is going to update that in the YAML file. So now that the configuration is ready, let us go ahead and ask it to update the configuration. And once that is done, it is going to ask us to go ahead and launch Prometheus and then access the target. Now, in this case, we don't have an IP address to access Prometheus, and so we are going to ask it to configure the Prometheus URL so that I can access it from an external IP address. So It is configuring the service, it is configuring it as a load balancer, and it is going to follow the similar process that it did for Nginx earlier and give us the external IP address. So here it's going to wait till the external IP address is not available. So in this case, it's pending, and after waiting for a few seconds, we can check with it again that can you share us the IP address once it is ready. And the moment we do that, if we see the IP address is available now, so let's go ahead and access Prometheus on the IP address that is mentioned. So I open a new tab, I paste the IP address, and there it is. The Prometheus instance is ready. And let us go ahead and look for our script target, which was Nginx exporter. So that is configured correctly. Let us go ahead and check for a few metrics. So let me look for Nginx connections handled. Let me go ahead and refresh the page, and the number is updating. So which means we have Prometheus correctly configured to fetch the metrics from the Nginx exporter. Now let us go ahead and also ask it to configure the node exporter plugin so that it can give me the matrix related to the node. So we'll get the CPU, the memory usage, the network, etc. of the node on which the cluster is configured. So here it is trying to access the Prometheus operator through GitHub, and it is having some issue. So what it will do is it will try to figure out different ways to do it. And in this case, it is creating its own daemon set for this. So it writes the file, it creates it, and once that is done, it will apply the node exporter to the cluster. So once we approve it, it has successfully been deployed on the cluster, and we will have the node metrics up and running. So now it is configuring the Prometheus config file with the node exporter plugin configured as one of the target. So now when we go ahead and check out Prometheus, we will be able to see the node metrics as well. So here, if you see, it has given an error in the configuration. So it is intelligent enough. So it is going to retry with a different mechanism. And in this case, it is trying to, it is updating the Prometheus config file again. And then it is going to restart the Prometheus deployment so that the changes are reflected. So it is going to restart the rollout. And now once it is restarted, we can go back to our Prometheus installation and see whether we are able to get the node exporter metrics or not. So here we are, and the moment I type node, I see a lot of metrics that are coming in, and I can see various things like the load or the CPU, and now we know that it is correctly configured. So now we will ask it to deploy Grafana, which is the main hero of our video today. So we'll ask it to install Grafana and then expose it via the service and give us the URL to access Grafana. So again, it knows that there is a Helm chart available to deploy Grafana. It does that, and once Grafana is installed, it is going to configure the service and give us the IP address that we can use to access the instance. So let us check the status of the external IP address. And here we have the external IP. And let us go ahead and access the Grafana dashboard. But before that, we need credentials for it, the admin, which is the username and the password. So meanwhile, I ask it to give me the password. Here is the Grafana instance that is ready. So I asked it to give us the password, and it has given us exactly what we asked for. So we log in using admin and the password that it gave, and voila, we are in the Grafana dashboard. So now that Grafana is installed, we will go ahead and ask it for the Prometheus URL that is required to be configured as a data source. So remember that whenever you are using Grafana, you need to have a data source defined. And in this case, we will be giving the URL of a Prometheus instance, which has all the metrics, and using that as a data source in our Grafana dashboard. So when I'm going to ask Clio to do that, it is going to give me the IP address of the Prometheus instance. And here it is what I have. So let us copy that and go to Grafana and add that under data sources. So I click on data source. choose Prometheus and provide this IP address. Now, once I do it, I click on save and test, and it is successful. So this means the connection is successful. And now I'm going to ask it to analyze the Nginx metrics and the node exporter metrics that we have configured on the cluster and generate a Grafana dashboard. So Grafana dashboard essentially are JSON files. So here we are asking Clio to analyze those metrics and decide the different kinds of visuals we can have, the different metrics that we should have. And here, if you see, it has given me a list of metrics that it is tracking for node exporter, as well as it has given me an idea of the dashboard outline as well. So when I ask it to go ahead and create the dashboard, it is going to create the JSON file for me. So now it has created a JSON dashboard. Let us go and import this JSON file into Grafana. I choose the file, it has defined a name, and I click on import. And here is the dashboard ready with the metrics that we have in place. So to make the dashboard a little more heavy with metrics and graphs, I'm going to ask it to create a small Python script that will generate some load on the application and the cluster that we have. So I'm asking it to create that script. And once that script is ready, I'll ask it to configure, I'll ask it to basically run that script. So here, if you see, it is going to simply make some 100 requests to the IP address that we have. And here, if you see, it is doing a test run before actually executing the script. So let us go ahead and ask it to actually run the script. So obviously, first it is going to save the file, and then we are going to ask it to execute the script. So here it is saving it as nginx underscore load underscore test.py. And it has given me a command to execute, but well, if Clio can do so many things, it can also execute this script for me. So I ask it to run the script. And while the script is executing in background, let us go to our Grafana dashboard and see if there are any changes in the metrics. So if you see here, I changed the scale to 5 minutes, and immediately you will see that there is a spike in the Nginx request count, and that number goes up, and so are the other metrics associated with it. So there's that spike. So that's pretty much it for this video. We saw how Clio can generate Grafana dashboard. For more ideas on how to use Clio, check out our blog on acon.io and check out the GitHub repository for Clio.